podcast where we will explore the dark corners of our world, the weird, the creepy, and the strange. I'm your host, Eric Carrier. My co-host is Jessica Carrier. Thank you for joining us for a journey into the unknown. Let's get started with today's show. Hey guys, welcome back to the podcast. My name is Eric Carrier. I am your host. I'm here with Jessica Carrier, my co-host.
Hey guys.
This is the Prairieland Paranormal Podcast, and this is episode number 2. What are we going to be talking about today, Jessica?
We're going to be talking about Thunderbirds.
Thunderbirds are pretty regional to where we live. Central Illinois is definitely a hot spot. The two major Thunderbird clusters that have been noted both occurred here in Central Illinois. We're going to be talking to you a little bit today about some of the local and regional Native American lore that's associated with Thunderbirds. We're also going to be talking about some witness accounts, and we'll talk a little bit about what we think they might be.
I've been thinking about Thunderbirds lately, and I've been thinking about large birds. You know, there's huge birds out there. You've got like pelicans and storks, but when you think about large birds and then you think about them being predatory birds, it's a very scary thought.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything comforting about a large predatory bird.
No.
So, you know, Illinois and much of the Midwest has long been rumored to be home to a particularly large group of birds. These birds have been termed Thunderbirds. Rumors of these large birds have been around for a very long time and go back at least as far as the early Native American populations. The early native populations of Illinois were certainly no strangers to these birds. Two giant petroglyphs of these birds once decorated the limestone bluffs of the Mississippi River near Alton, Illinois. These petroglyphs are believed to have been created by the Cahokia. The Cahokia was a large advanced civilization of Native American mound builders. They primarily lived on the banks of the Mississippi River until their civilization started to disappear about the 13th century. The largest North American earth mound was built by the Cahokia, and it still stands today just outside of St. Louis, Missouri.
We went there not too long ago, and it was a pretty interesting sight to go see.
Yeah, definitely an interesting sight. The mound that is there is massive.
Sometimes I wonder why they built those mounds.
Well, according to the museum and site that's there, they likely built these mounds as a form of worship or some sort of a temple.
That makes sense.
We've had an opportunity to visit some of the mounds in other parts of the Midwest here. One of those mounds is just outside of Evansville, Indiana, called Angel Mounds. These mound sites all over the Midwest are very interesting and certainly worth a trip or a visit. The folklore of the Cahokia is filled with many fantastic creatures, and several large petroglyphs of serpents and dragons and monstrous birds have been found dotting the cliffs of the Mississippi River around Alton, Illinois. It is believed that these petroglyphs served a religious purpose and also served as a warning for travelers and enemies as they were entering into the Cahokia territory. The most famous of these petroglyphs is known as the Piasa, which translates to the bird that devours men. That doesn't sound ominous at all. That doesn't sound ominous at all, does it? This is a massive petroglyph, and it's etched into the limestone cliffs just outside of Alton, Illinois. There was a early explorer in this area who was a Jesuit missionary. His name was Pierre Marquette. And he described these petroglyphs in his journal in 1673 as he was exploring this area.
Here's an excerpt from his journal. We saw upon one of them 2 painted monsters, which at first made us afraid, and upon which the boldest savage dared not long to rest their eyes. They were as large as a calf. They had horns on their heads like those of a deer, a horrible look, red eyes, a beard like a tiger's, a face somewhat like a man's, a body covered with scales, and so long a tail that it winds around the body, passing above the head and going back between the legs, ending in a fish's tail. That's quite a combination of animals there.
It is, and it actually, if you see the petroglyph or a drawing of the petroglyph, it looks like very much like a hybrid reptilian type of dragon or bird.
Yeah, it is very unusual.
The Cahokia tribe called these birds Thunderbirds, and they called them that because of the sound that they made when they were flapping their giant wings. It's been said that the flap of their wings made the ground reverberate. These birds were considered to be highly intelligent. Many of the tales of the Plains Native Americans talk about these creatures alternating between preying on and oftentimes helping the tribe in some way. According to a story that was published by John Russell, the creature depicted on the petroglyphs was a huge bird that lived in the cliffs. Russell claimed that this creature attacked and devoured people in nearby Indian villages, and these birds often showed up after war to feast on the corpses. In fact, it probably was the war and the corpses that gave the birds a taste for human flesh. Legend has it that a local Indian chief by the name of Owatoga managed to slay the monster using a plan that was given to him in a dream by the Great Spirit. Jessica, you did some research on Owatoga. Can you share that?
Yeah, Owatoga, he seemed like a very spiritual man. He had spent time fasting and praying before he had this dream from the Great Spirit, and the Great Spirit basically showed him how to take down the monster. It showed him that there was a special place under the wings where there were no scales, and that if their braves shot arrows at one spot, then they would be able to take down this beast. So Owatoga gathered some of his bravest men, and they went to confront the creature. Owatoga stood outside of the cave, and he banged a drum to try to get the creature's attention, while his men hid. And when the monster presented itself, they shot him under the wing, as he'd been shown in the dream, with poison arrows, and they were able to take him down.
Russell claimed that the mural that was painted by the Indians was painted as a commemoration of this heroic event. The Thunderbird figure is not only prominent in the Cahokia, it is also prominent through many of the other Plains tribes as well. This includes the Lakota. The Lakota believe that the birds embodied the Supreme Being, and that the creature actually helped to create all of the living things here on Earth. The Algonquin believe that the Thunderbirds control the upper world, while the underworld is controlled by the underwater panther or the great horned serpent. The Thunderbirds protect mankind by throwing lightning at the underworld creatures, keeping them at bay. Other Algonquin legends teach that the Thunderbirds are ancestors to the human race and played an important role in the creation of the universe.
The Menominee of northern Wisconsin have a legend that tells of a great mountain that floats in the western sky. The Thunderbirds dwell there and control the rain. They love a good fight, and they revel in deeds of greatness. They are sworn enemies to the great horned snake, and fight to prevent these underworld creatures from overrunning the earth and devouring mankind. They are believed to be messengers of the great sun himself.
There are also legends among the Ojibwe. These legends speak of the Thunderbirds being created for the purpose of fighting the underwater spirits. They also believe that humans could be punished by the Thunderbirds for breaking moral rules. The Thunderbirds were believed to have lived in the four directions and were known to arrive with the other birds in the springtime, which was considered to be the season of the underwater spirits, and migrate south after the end of that season.
The Winnebago believed that the Thunderbirds could grant humans with great abilities, and the man who fasted and received a vision of a Thunderbird would become a war chief.
There's also legends among the Sioux. The Sioux believe that, like the many other tribes, that the Thunderbirds play a role in protecting mankind, particularly from dangerous reptilian underworld creatures. It's clear from these stories that the Plains tribes both respected and feared the Thunderbird. I find it interesting, as we've kind of read all those stories, that they're all very similar, that they all talk about the Thunderbirds protecting mankind from these great horned snakes or these underwater spirits or underworld spirits.
We've already talked a little bit about how the idea of a Thunderbird is scary, but when you think about them this way, as protectors, I kind of like that a little bit better. I'd rather have a big scary bird as my protector looking out for me than to think of them as trying to devour me.
Yeah, that's certainly a more comforting thought.
But then I wonder what exactly are the reptiles they're talking about that are constantly trying to devour us from below.
Yeah, that's not a comforting thought at all. So we go from comforting to not comforting. So Illinois has actually been host to at least a couple of clusters of sightings of Thunderbirds. The first cluster of sightings was in 1948 and started on April 4th. There was a Army colonel by the name of Walter F. Sigmund who reported that he had seen a gigantic bird in the sky above Alton. This was his report. "I thought there was something wrong with my eyesight," he said, "but it was definitely a bird and not a glider or a jet plane. It appeared to be flying northeast. From the movements of the object and its size, I figured it could only be a bird of tremendous size." A few days later, a farmer named Robert Price from Caledonia would report a similar bird. He called it a monster bird, bigger than a plane. On April 10th, another sighting occurred in Overland. The huge bird was spotted by Mr. and Mrs. Clyde Smith and Les Bacon. They said they thought the creature was a plane until it started to flap its wings furiously.
On April 24th, the bird was back in Alton. It was sighted by E.M. Coleman and his son James. It was an enormous, incredible thing with body that looked like a naval torpedo. Coleman recalled later, "It was flying at about 500 feet and cast a shadow the same size as a Piper Cub at that height." Okay, what is a Piper Cub?
A Piper Cub is a single propeller bush plane. It's a small plane, but certainly big for a bird.
Yes, that would be very scary.
On May 5th, the bird was spotted again in Alton. A man by the name of Arthur Davidson called the police that evening to report a bird flying above the city. Later on that same night, Mrs. William Stallings of St. Louis informed the authorities that she had also seen it. She described that it was bright and about the size of a house. Sightings continued for several days in the St. Louis area, but then just as quickly as the sightings started, they ended. And no one really knows why these sightings ended at that time. And then over 20 years later, starting in the 1970s, sightings started to appear again. The first account of the 1970s occurred in 1973 by Joni Graw. She recorded this account from Pike County. She stated,
"I was walking down towards Kaiser Creek. It was a beautiful summer day. I would guess mid to late July. The beans were up in the fields. I had to walk up this hill, and at the top of the hill was a pond. A beautiful, really secluded area. Adjacent to the hill is a holler, surrounded by trees. When I was nearing the hill, I heard this trumpet-like screech. It was so strange, unlike anything I'd ever heard before. And then I saw them. There were 3 of them, 2 big ones and a little one. I say little, but there was nothing little about it. They were the biggest, most frightening birds I'd ever seen. The big ones were literally as big as a person standing there. Not thin like a stork, but huge. Thick as a person. They looked prehistoric. They were all gray-colored, wrinkly-skinned, and matted. Their beaks were not ridiculously long, not like a heron's, and somewhat hooked. Their heads were feathered, not bald like a buzzard. The 2 big ones were smart enough to roost on the ground, but the little one, the child, I assume, seemed more naive. It tried to perch on a tree. This tree was a thin tree, but it had to be 40 feet tall. The tree buckled, completely bent, under the little bird's weight. I dropped to the ground, just shaking in fear, and tried to hide in the beans. I guess it worked, because they didn't act like they saw me. The big ones started flapping their wings, and the earth was literally reverberating from it. The beans were waving. The wingspan must have been at least 12 feet. I just started praying, "Oh my God, protect me."
Graw remained in the beans for several minutes until the 3 creatures departed. Graw then ran half a mile home in shock and terror from what she had just witnessed. Another cluster began in 1977, with perhaps the most well-known encounter occurring in Lawndale, Illinois. The Marlon Lowe encounter occurred on July 25th, 1977, and it occurred at about 8:10 in the evening. The Lowes, had just finished dinner, and Ruth Lowe was in the kitchen cleaning up when she heard the sound of children screaming outside. One of the screams she recognized as her 10-year-old son Marlon. Marlon had been playing outside with 2 other neighborhood boys. When she ran outside to see what all the screaming was about, she was stunned to see 2 massive birds chasing the children. The largest of the 2 swooped and pecked at her son. Ruth ran to Marlon's aid, but as she did, the larger of the 2 birds sunk its claws into Marlon's shirt and fully lifted the 56-pound boy off the ground. Marlon struck at the bird's legs with his free arm, and the bird eventually dropped him to the ground, but not before carrying him at least 3 feet off the ground for at least 35 feet. Several neighbors had come to the aid of Ruth and the boys, and after the incident had concluded, Ruth and the neighbors watched as the birds flew off towards Kickapoo Creek. In her statement to the police, Ruth described the bird as such.
It had a white ring around its half-foot-long neck. The rest of the body was very black. The bird's bill was 6 inches in length and hooked at the end. The claws on the feet were arranged with 3 front, 1 in the back. Each wing, less the body, was 4 feet at the very least. The entire length of the bird's body from beak to tail feather was approximately 4 1/2 feet.
The other witnesses described the bird as black in color, with bands of white around their necks. They had long, curved beaks and a wingspan of at least 10 feet. Even though several neighbors saw what had happened, Ruth and Marlon Lowe's story was met with quite a bit of skepticism, and even to some degree ridicule. As the story circulated around the local press, Marlon quickly became known locally as the Bird Boy, and dead pigeons were often tossed onto the Lowe's front porch.
Why do people do that?
I don't know. Maybe if they make it something funny or something to joke about, then it doesn't quite seem so real.
That would be terrifying if it was real.
Many local people, including a game warden, tried to convince everyone that the birds were nothing more than turkey vultures. But after much research, Ruth Lowe believed that the bird was actually an Andean condor.
We've seen turkey vultures. They're all around here. They are pretty big, but they are nothing compared to what Ruth described.
They're certainly not big enough to pick up a 56-pound child and carry it away for several feet.
Exactly.
Sightings died off for a few days after that encounter, but then started up again about 3 days later in McLean County when a farmer spotted a bird of the same size and description flying over his farm. He and his wife and several friends were watching radio-controlled airplanes when the bird flew close to the models. He claimed the bird had a wingspan of at least 10 feet, and it dwarfed the small planes that buzzed close to it.
The next sighting took place near Bloomington, when a mail truck driver named James Majors spotted 2 birds. He was driving when he saw them alongside the highway. One of the birds dropped down into a field and snatched up a small animal. He believed the 2 birds were probably condors, with 8 to 10-foot wingspans.
On July 28th, Lisa Montgomery of Tremont was washing her car when she looked up and saw a giant bird crossing the sky overhead. I'm pretty sure she's glad that the bird didn't do any damage to her freshly washed car. There was another report late at night on July 30th from Dennis Turner. He and several friends from Downs reported a monstrous bird perched on a telephone pole. Turner stated that the bird dropped something near the base of the pole. Later that night, when police officers investigated the sighting, they found a huge rat near that spot.
Reports of giant birds continued to come in from Bloomington and north-central Illinois area. Then finally further south, in Decatur, Macon, and Sullivan. On July 30th, the same day that the birds were reported near Bloomington, a writer and construction worker named Texas John Huffer filmed 2 large birds while fishing at Lake Shelbyville. Huffer frightened the birds with his boat horn, and when they took flight, he managed to capture them on video. Huffer said that the largest bird had a wingspan of over 12 feet. After the footage aired on local news, experts were quick to dismiss Huffer's video. Officials from the Department of Conservation insisted the birds were merely turkey vultures. Not surprisingly, these claims were refuted by wildlife experts and cryptozoologists who stated that no turkey vultures were of the size reported by witnesses.
Hufner's videos are available on YouTube if you'd like to take a look at those. I've seen those videos, and while it definitely shows 2 large birds, The video is shot in a way that does not really allow for true scale to be determined, and it's very, very difficult to determine the actual size of these birds. So while reports still trickle in from time to time, this was the last of the last large sightings or clusters of Thunderbird sightings here in Illinois and in the Midwest. So no one's been able to positively identify these birds, but there are certainly some theories as to what these birds might be.
This is where we've kind of had some fun thinking about what they could be and looking into other people's theories of what they possibly are.
One of the theories is that they may be what are called teratons. Some cryptozoological researchers, such as Lauren Coleman, believes that these Thunderbirds may be teratons. Teratons are a supposedly extinct bird that once roamed North and South America. If these prehistoric survivors are still around today, they could certainly account for the reports of the giant birds. The overall description, with the white ring, the hooked beak, is certainly common to many of the birds in the vulture family, including the turkey vulture and many of the condor family.
Illinois and the Midwest is certainly known to have a significant population of turkey vultures. These are large birds that look a lot like what the witnesses described. They're actually large enough to have pegged marlin as an easy meal, but they're generally known as scavengers and usually don't hunt live prey.
You might remember turkey vultures from the old animated Disney Jungle Book, where they sat on the old decrepit tree going, "What do you want to do?"
I don't know. What do you want to do?
I don't know. What do you want to do? In true life, they're probably not that dumb. The most likely culprit that I would think is probably condors. Their birds could have theoretically also been strayed condors. In the case of Marlon Lowe, he and his parents said that the bird closely resembled an Andean condor, a black vulture-like species with a wingspan of around 10 feet. This species, however, is not native to North America. There is a smaller version called the California condor, which was widely known to live across North America, but in 1977, this species was virtually extinct and only found in a specific part of California. In either case, the structure of condors' feet are really incapable of lifting and transporting anything as heavy as a 10-year-old boy. So at this point, the true identity of the Thunderbird is still quite a bit of a mystery. We have early Native American lore that describes it more like a dragon with scales and wings and horns and a tail, and we have witness reports that describe it as a large bird that is currently unclassified. Is it possible for a large bird to still live in this world and still be considered unclassified or undiscovered? I totally think that that is possible. This world is much bigger than we think, and there are places within this world that have not been explored as much as we think that they have. So yes, I think that it is totally possible that we have undiscovered creatures that might still surprise us someday. So as you're traveling the Midwest, if you're traveling Illinois, make sure that you keep your eyes to the sky, and you might just be surprised at what you find. Because there still are sightings that are occurring today, even though they're trickling in fewer and fewer. Jessica, what do you think?
I think it's kind of arrogant for us to consider that we've seen everything. I think it's important to keep an open mind.
I totally agree with that. Well, folks, I think we'll end the podcast here. We appreciate you joining us.
All right, folks, that's the end of this
Thanks for
episode.
listening.
Yeah,
Thank you for joining us. We appreciate you listening. If you have enjoyed the show, please consider subscribing. You can also find us on Facebook and Twitter. And remember, if you've had a paranormal experience that you would like to share, please email us at prairielandparanormalpodcast@gmail.com or visit our website at prairielandparanormalpodcast.com. So until next time, remember, don't be normal when you can be paranormal.